It's portal season, and Scott Frost has a wide receiver room to build.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Come on in to Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me as he does every single week is my good friend, Andrew Gluco from The Last Word on Sports, purveyor of all things UCF, and expert on all things UCF. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me today. Today we're talking wide receiver. We're going to talk about some visits that UCF has coming, and we're also going to talk about transfers at basketball. We can't leave the drama alone, but we'll get to that in the last segment. Let's start with the wide receiver room. UCF returns a very little production from last year in the wide receiver room. As a matter of fact, the top 8 pass catchers from last year are all gone, and Scott Frost has to find a way to stack the deck around his quarterback. Talk to me about this wide receiver room.
Well, from a production standpoint, carrying over from last year, not good, Bob. Your leading pass catcher from last season is your running back Miles Montgomery, who was your 9th guy with 66 yards receiving, and then you have Kylan Fox at number 12. He's a tight end, and then Grant Stevens at 15. And that 15 is the lowest player who had any receptions during the season. So out of 15, you have 3 guys, 8, 12, and 15 still on this team. So brand new, cast of characters. And we talked about, with, Scott Frost coming in and the opportunity to just hit the reset button. Well, this is, you're hitting the reset button, not just in your own house, from a coaching standpoint, you're hitting a reset button from a talent standpoint too. So they hit the portal. They brought in a bunch of guys. One of the guys in particular was transferred Day Farmer from West Virginia. Very, had a lot of, good notoriety coming in. Unfortunately, got hurt during spring ball. He's out for the season. Not a good spot, but yeah, you have a couple of potential diamonds in there. DJ Black is a transfer from Limestone University, which oddly enough is potentially a day away from announcing that they're permanently shutting the doors.
Crazy,
actually. Yeah, just the timing of it all. A small little D2 school, had over 900 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns last year for Limestone. And, so he has a possibility of stepping in. He knows how to deal with the workload. You need someone with that kind of experience. Another player to look into is the transfer from Florida, Marcus Burke. Now, interestingly enough, Burke has a number of starts. He started, 7 games?
Yeah.
But overall, doesn't play a lot of snaps. He'll start and then just play a handful of snaps during the day. But he has played against UCF. He actually, started that game. He didn't see a lot of action, just a few snaps on that one. But if you actually go to UCF's, bio page for him, they go game by game of what he did. And he started this game. He started this game. He started against top 10 competition, but just, didn't play that many, maybe 30 snaps at the most or something like that, if not lower. But, at least he knows what it takes to play at that kind of level, played on a number of running plays. And as you know, one of the big things, no block, no rock. So, if you're a wide receiver, you know how to block, you're in good shape. And then you have another transfer from Charlotte, Dwayne Thomas, who played sparingly for Charlotte in the last couple of seasons. He played only 8 games last year. He played all 12 the year before. So he also has experience, obviously not nearly as much as DJ Black, but he still has, FBS experience at Charlotte. So you've got some guys coming in that have some game experience, but overall, for the majority of, you've got this cast of characters coming in that just do not have a lot of game time. And that's where it's going to really fall into Scott Frost's staff. Sean Beckton's really got to work with these guys to bring them up to speed and be ready. But to every, there's a silver lining here. You have new players. They're malleable. They're eager to learn. They want to get on the field, and there's opportunity to get on the field. There's no preconceived notions because there's no Kobe Hudsons that are being held over from the previous season. There's no Xavier Townsend. So as a result, there's a lot of opportunity for these guys to really step up, and I think that would help motivate them to do even more to try to learn this new offense.
When we talk about the failures of the wide receiver room last year, Andrew, we tend to talk about it from the quarterback's end. The quarterbacks weren't able to make the passes that they needed to make. But I do believe it's going to be easier to find diamonds in the rough at wide receiver and stack the deck around Cam Fancher and Taven Jackson and these guys that you have competing for the QB job. The Big 12 had 7,000-yard receivers last year. UCF's leading receiver last year was Kobe Hudson with 770 yards. Again, you lose all of your production, so you have no returning production in that room. And there's a lot of work to be done there. I think that there were, 7,000-yard receivers is for a single conference is crazy. And for reference, I want to talk about how many receptions it took those guys to get there. The lowest of them was Jack Beck at TCU, and he had 60. He got 1,034 yards on only 62 receptions. The rest of these guys were closer to somewhere between 80 and 90, almost 100 receptions. So you didn't have that many passes to go around if you were UCF. Holy crap. Talking about the guys that are coming in, again, in our second segment, we'll talk about, the guys they got coming on visits. But you've got to find a way, I think, to get a guy like, Kobe Hudson, looking at how many receptions he had last year. 47 is too little. In today's college football, that's too little. Your leading receiver has to have at least 70 to 80 receptions a season, in my opinion.
Well, again, it's like you said, it talks about, you talk about who's throwing the ball. You're comparing, 2024's offense, which the quarterback situation was an absolute mess.
Disaster.
John Rice Plumlee in 23. And while John Rice got a lot of flack from fans, the truth was he really wasn't a bad quarterback. A lot of times he got beat up and it affected him, but, Kobe Hudson had 44 catches in 23, and that was second on the team. He had 900 yards, second on the team. You had Javon Baker, had 52 receptions, over 1,100 yards. That was your leader. Hudson was the other guy at 900 yards. If they had a quarterback worth, starting in Big 12, and I'm sorry for those fans, Dylan Risk wasn't the guy. And there's a reason why he left in the portal, because he wasn't the guy. And the numbers speak for themselves. Outside of, the first day where no one had film on him, each game got progressively worse and worse and worse as teams figured him out. While there may be some room in the ceiling, to build on, what was there was, there was a reason why he was, a fourth string earlier in the season. EJ Colson was a true freshman, yet he jumped Dylan Risk in the quarterback room earlier in the year. Colson fell apart when it came to game time, and it took a few more weeks before Risk was truly ready. And then when he came in, he did well, and the rest is history. But we've seen it. There was no one that could handle the offense and the scrutiny and the pressure like John Rice Plumlee did. And the numbers speak for themselves. So now let's fast forward to 2025. You have Taven Jackson here. You have Cam Fancher here. You have Ja'Carri Brown, and while we saw Brown on the field last year, this is a new style of offense that may actually play to him a little bit better. He may be a little more comfortable with this style of offense, but Taven Jackson, highly touted transfer from Indiana through Tennessee. There's high expectations for him. We may solve a lot of these problems that we saw in 2024, or it's just going to be a little bit more of the same. But as you said, it's easier to groom a wide receiver than it is to groom a quarterback.
Yeah, you got to go out and you got to find those diamonds in the rough there. That's where you have to start if you're Scott Frost and rebuilding this roster. Go out and find that underrated talent that's overlooked from other programs. Look, they had a guy that's coming in on a visit who may be one of those overlooked, underrated talents. We'll talk about him right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Supply House, Andrew. You can get the supplies you need from a site made for the skilled trades with our friends at Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. I can tell you, my girlfriend and I are getting ready to rebuild our house, so I may be in here trying to get some supplies. I don't know if I'm going to be doing HVAC, but certainly I'm handy at electrical work for sure. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest products and info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast and from coast to coast. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Tony Johnson from Cincinnati is visiting Orlando. The receiver, when we talk about those diamonds in the rough, this is a guy just under 500 yards receiving for Cincinnati last year. He had 48 receptions. Again, in talking about where you want your leading receiver to be, he wasn't as productive as Kobe Hudson because he was 47 receptions, 700 yards receiving, but certainly 6 touchdowns is not bad. And you're going to need touchdowns because red zone scoring was atrocious for UCF last year. They're going to have to find guys who can make plays in the end zone here for these quarterbacks. I think Tony Johnson could be potentially that guy. I like that he's visiting.
Well, UCF needs a guy. Day Farmer, the transfer from West Virginia, had a lot of expectations. He's out for the year. Unfortunate injury during spring ball. So there's a need for a wide receiver with experience. And now you're talking a material amount of Big 12 experience there. So there's value there. Now, Cincinnati was not a good team last year. Of course, you could say the same thing about UCF, but Cincinnati was not a good team last year. And, they had their own quarterback struggles. So it does not come to surprise that the numbers are a little low for Tony Johnson, but they're consistent. He knows how to find a way to the end zone. He can make consistent catches, would be a valuable guy. And much like 15, 16 players on the team that are transfers, is from Florida. He's from Ocala, so this would be a chance to come home. This has become a selling point for UCF. It started, back in the O'Leary days, where, try to come home. But it's really taken off with the NIL days. And this is something that Gus Malzahn did a pretty good job of. And you riding the success of RJ Harvey, the hometown hero, come back to Florida. You go out of state, you go do your thing, enjoy what the college experience has for you, and then come back home when you grow up. You're a little bit older, you're a little bit wiser, and you want mom and dad to become able to watch you play consistently. So you come back to Florida, and UCF's one of those schools that, hey, you're in a power conference. It gives you opportunities that a South Florida, an FAU or FIU won't give you, and it's easier to break in and create something new and special compared to just another cog in Florida, Florida State, and Miami.
Yeah.
So that I've always said, do you want to be a part of history like you would at Florida State, or Miami, or do you want to write the history, which is, create the history? And that's UCF, which is still very young, still on the upward trajectory, catching up to these guys. But there are players out there that would be excited at the opportunity to not just be, just a part, but to be able to create and write something that becomes a piece of history. RJ Harvey, McKenzie, Milton, these players that were overlooked or not widely recruited. I mean, RJ Harvey was recruited as a quarterback up at went to Virginia. McKenzie Milton, was looked at by Scott Frost, but wasn't heavily recruited. Kind of undersized. Blake Bortles was recruited by most schools to be a tight end. I mean, he wasn't even. Only a couple gave him a chance to be a quarterback, which is what he was in high school. He did okay too. So come to UCF where you can immortalize yourself. I mean, how hard is it to get to that kind of stature at UCF versus Florida? I mean, what do you expect to be the next Tim Tebow and win a Heisman? That's what you have to do at Florida, but you don't have to win a Heisman to be immortalized at UCF. There's still growing, and while the standard's working its way up, it's not as developed. So it's still an adolescent program. I think there's a lot more opportunity there, and I'm thinking they're doing a pretty good job of selling that because people are coming back. It's working.
Yeah. Look, when I think about a guy like Tony Johnson, I'm thinking about a guy who extremely talented, but maybe that last couple programs not a great fit. And we see guys go into new systems like what Scott Frost is going to be running. It's a better fit. You see more production, and you see a better version of that player in that life at that new program. UCF is going to become that spot for a lot of guys, I suspect, under Scott Frost, where it was my first program wasn't a good fit, Andrew. And now I'm in a program where I fit, where they understand how to plug me in, how to use me, and they need me. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of things, for some of these guys, you go to these programs and, maybe they fell behind or they got behind the eight ball. Sometimes it's politics with the pecking order. And the best guy doesn't always play. And I think that fans have a lot of trouble with that idea sometimes, that just because a guy is leaving a program does not mean that he's not good and that he doesn't have talent. Tony Johnson could be a dude at UCF. He could be the dude he never could be at Cincinnati. We'll see how that works out for him, certainly. But look, this offseason is going to be riddled with portal news. We're going to cover every second of it. But we're going to revisit a story that we talked about our friend Mustafa John, that rascal, right after a quick word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On UCF is brought to you by our friends at Game Time, Andrew. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. The NBA playoffs are here. Who do you got winning the whole thing? Tell me, who you got winning this whole thing?
I'm biased. Cavaliers all the way.
Cleveland, of course. Look, LeBron is no longer there, but if you're like Andrew and you're faithful to the end, visit our friends at Game Time. If it's electric there in Cleveland, it's going to be even more electric with Game Time, and you can be a part of it without the last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off comes closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. Here's why I use Game Time. You get priority, last-minute deals. You can save up to 60%, and the all-in pricing means no surprises at checkout, which is my favorite. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today and create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, low prices, guaranteed. What time is it?
Game time.
Game time. Mustafa Cham has chosen, oddly enough, Cincinnati. So we talked about this. Give us our wide receiver. We'll give you our center, I guess. Look, no surprise to either of us that this was his landing point. We talked about the particulars of this on another segment. If you have not seen that, I encourage you to go back and watch that segment. There were some stipulations, and he was a package deal, and Cincinnati complied. But what I want to talk about is the number. Now, there was a report, and you're going to fill us in here, that $2 million was the number to get him to Cincinnati. I am shocked and flabbergasted and floored by that number. Give me the deets here, man. $2 million for Mustafa Cham. I like the kid, but I don't know if I like him $2 million.
Yeah, that's the report from Matt Marshall at the Orlando Sentinel.
Yep, Matt.
According to a source of his, it's in the $2 million range. There's no way UCF was going to be able to chase that. Their range is somewhere like $3 million for the whole program. So there was no way UCF was going to be able to keep him. At this point, it's becoming very well known. It's not obviously Cham has signed. That was the announcement today, or as we're talking about on Monday, April 21st.
Yep.
But as we talked about before, there was some stipulations. Well, since it's been trickling out, we can start talking more about it. The expectation is assistant coach who is no longer part of UCF's program, Mahmoud Njai, is a former Auburn player.
Yep.
Is supposed to be joining the Cincinnati Bearcats as an assistant coach, and the scuttle on that was this was a package deal that's been talked about for quite a while during the season. So the real question is, does UCF is there any ramifications? Does UCF have an opportunity to do anything about this? Obviously players come and go, but coaches negotiating package deals like an agent would.
That's crazy.
Under contract as an assistant coach. I don't know the specific rules. I'm not a sports lawyer, but this obviously screams red flags all over the place as far as
it's unethical at the very least, right? Like
at the least,
it's unethical, and I don't think that that's operating in good faith if you're Mamadou. I know he's a former Auburn guy, but like I don't like that at all. And look, ultimately, if they were going to shop, they were going to shop. And
there's a reason why Auburn said no.
Like there's certain things that are a step too far. But I just think that this is the reality of today's college sports all over the place. I'm reporting, and Mustafa is not the only kid I'm reporting on right now who they're getting advice, from people that they should make moves now. Now, look, man, he was a true freshman last year. So if he got $2 million to make his first jump, I think financially that's not a bad decision. And so I'm not knocking him for that. Get your money, young man. If that number being reported is true, I don't see how you don't do that if you're Mustafa Cham. But
can't say no.
Yeah. You can't say no to that money. But then in terms of what you're leaving, it's not like you're leaving a thriving basketball program as well either. It's just if you're UCF and you wanted a chance to hold on to this kid, you're already behind the 8 ball. So, if people are willing to wait into the gray to get players and you are unwilling to do that, you're going to have a hard time holding on to anybody, really.
Well, here's the thing. We're talking about the eve, essentially, of the House settlement kicking in. It's supposed to kick in July 1st, assuming everything is finalized. Not quite there yet. However, schools are planning for it. And you're seeing schools with their NIL collectives, which are still active, doing front-loaded contracts to get them in. Pay them money now, get them in, because once July 1st hits, you can't use the collective. You got it's going through schools now. And UCF, as we've talked about, is one of the first schools to announce that they were dissolving the Kingdom. The Kingdom's executive director has already moved on, found a new job. So UCF is moving forward with these plans to get this in place. But you're seeing schools overpay for players because that's where that private money is going. Very soon, that is going to be much more highly regulated. So you can't just throw a $2 million bag at a player, because now, as of July 1st, when the new academic year starts, those players and those finances are now going to be under the oversight of the school, which is under the auspice of the NCAA. So they're taking advantage right now. If the House settlement wasn't happening, you wouldn't see this free-for-all going on in college basketball. Over 700 players hit the portal when it was not even a third of that last year. players were sticking around more because it wasn't such a Wild West madhouse, because there's the desperation for these collectives to get the money out. They're pushing harder and just, hey, we've got this cash, go use it.
Yeah, it's wild to me that this is where we're at. But $2 million is a crazy number. I'm sorry. Like I'm having a really, really hard time with that number. And they've got to rein this in. But, again, once that house settlement passes and we start to see, I think, essentially what is going to be a salary cap. We talked about the idea of schools having GMs and things of that nature, Andrew, but we need to get there quickly because this is getting out of control. Look, Mustafa Cham was going to leave UCF. Can we just agree? Look, I mean, regardless of the number, he was going to leave UCF because if money was their goal, I don't think that UCF was going to be able to compete. And clearly, with the interest that Auburn showed in him and other schools, showed in actually forking over the money, people see the potential there in a player like this, and good for him. I'm not against players getting paid, but I do think that the system needs to be regulated a lot better than it is right now, and this is a perfect example of that, because here's what happens too is that you're going to see schools overspend and set a bad market for a player when you start throwing around these crazy numbers, and you're going to artificially inflate the market, and everybody's going to be overpaying for these kids until you got the haves and the have-nots, and the have-nots are going to be squeezed out.
That's what's happening right now. You're talking about like Houston and Kansas. You're talking $8 to $10 million payrolls for their players. I mean, that's outrageous for a dozen players on your team, basically. I mean, it's an absolute outrageous number. They were talking about like maybe a dozen and a half, 20 teams, at $8 million plus, and then it goes down real quick. UCF's not even sniffing that. There's no way they're going to be able to chase that kind of cash, which is why it doesn't, we weren't surprised that Cham hit the market.
Right.
Very, unlike, a Keyshawn Hall, who's making a fraction of that. What you see is what you get. He's a 1-year rental. Cham, he's still got 3 more years of full play eligibility, potentially 4 if there's a red shirt in there for some reason, injury or whatever. So you've 3 years. Yeah. You throw a bag at him, and Cincinnati, showing that, their strong basketball history still has some good support. It's not like their football program, which, just doesn't, carry as much weight. Their basketball used to be one of the nation's best. Back in the days of Conference USA and the early part of the Big East that they were in, they were legit. Kenyon Martin, all those, was a beast when he was there in college.
Kenyon Martin, one of my favorite college players, by the way.
I mean, he was the absolute beast in college. So Cincinnati, they won national championships back in the 60s. So this is a program that has been to the top. There's generational dollars there, and they're utilizing it to retool this team. I can't blame Cincinnati for going after him. The issue I have is with NJ and how he did it. But I mean, for Cham, man, go get paid, son.
Yeah, it's the adults in the room. I'm telling you, it's the adults in the room that are driving a lot, I think, of the decisions that we're seeing from some of these athletes. My message to college athletes, I've said it on every show I do, is choose your advisors wisely, right? Because there are a lot of people out here advising these kids who are not properly qualified to advise them on financial matters, on life matters, on spiritual matters. You have to choose your circle wisely. I choose my circle wisely every week because I hang out with you. So
I don't know about that, man.
We'll be back tomorrow to talk more UCF sports. Andrew, I want to thank you for joining me. Before we get out of here, as always, tell people where they can find you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X or Blue Sky at StatBoyDrew, and you can catch my work on The Last Word on College Football, a part of The Last Word on Sports family.
Thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. For your next listen, go check out Locked On Big 12. They're talking everything Big 12, including the UCF Knights. You can find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us here tomorrow on Locked On UCF.